4:47 a.m. Clayton County, Georgia. A black tactical van rolled to a stop on a cul-de-sac that dead-ended behind a row of subdivision houses. No sirens. No lights. The street was completely dark except for one amber lamppost at the far end. The houses on either side were still. Curtains drawn. Everyone asleep. Except in the beige two-story at the end. A 12-person entry team from Homeland Security Investigations Atlanta moved on foot from 3 directions. 2 agents peeled off toward the garage. A second stack of 4 moved toward the rear. The lead breach agent reached the garage side door at 4:48, with the ram already in position. The team wore plate carriers with no markings visible from the street. Earpieces in. Hand signals only for the final 30 meters. The temperature was 31 degrees. Their breath showed in the amber lamplight at the far end of the cul-de-sac, but not at the garage, not where they needed invisibility. 9 women were inside that house. The youngest was 22. The oldest, 28. They had been there 77 days. Their families in 3 different states didn't yet know they were about to get a phone call. What cracked this case open wasn't a federal wiretap or a confidential informant or surveillance footage. It was a grocery delivery driver. Same-day delivery, turned away at the front door 3 times in 3 weeks by a man who never let anyone in. Always cash. Always at the door. Always waved off before the driver could reach the porch. One small detail. Unremarkable. The kind of thing you file away and forget. But it led a North Georgia human smuggling and trafficking task force investigator to a padlocked bedroom on the 2nd floor of a rented house in Riverdale. This is how it happened. The house at the end of the cul-de-sac first appeared in HSI Atlanta's files in late November 2025. Not as a target, as a data point. One line in a broader financial audit being run by the North Georgia Human Smuggling and Trafficking Task Force, a multi-agency body that had been tracking irregular cash flows tied to short-term rental properties in southern metro Atlanta since the previous summer. The task force watched for a specific pattern. Rental properties, not hotels or leased apartments. Corporate short-term rentals booked through third-party platforms, paid with rotating debit cards tied to no identity. Occupancy patterns that didn't match any legitimate business use. High utility draws. Covered windows. No foot traffic during daylight. Occasional vehicle movement between midnight and 4 a.m. The beige two-story on the Clayton County cul-de-sac matched every marker. So did 11 other properties in the same audit period. The task force had limited surveillance bandwidth and had to triage. The house sat in the lower half of the priority list for 6 weeks. What moved it up was a man listed in federal files as Subject 1. Subject 1 appeared in financial records tied to a limited liability company registered in Gwinnett County in September 25. The LLC had a generic name, the kind that shows up in dozens of small business filings without triggering any flags. Staffing and placement services. Subject 1 was listed as registered agent. The company had no employees on record. No tax filings, no physical office beyond the registered agent's home address, and no web presence except a single job listing page, active since October 25. The listings looked completely normal at a glance. Administrative assistant roles. Au pair placements. Healthcare support staffing for traveling professionals. Each listing was detailed and professional, using language from legitimate staffing industry templates. Competitive pay. Travel stipend included. Housing provided during placement. Immediate start. That last line, housing provided during placement, was what unraveled everything. One of the women who answered one of those listings was a 26-year-old travel nurse from Louisville, Kentucky, referred to here as Mara. She was licensed with 2 years of clinical experience. She'd used legitimate travel nursing staffing agencies before and knew the contract model. When a recruiter reached out through a professional networking platform in early October 2025 and offered a placement at an undisclosed Metro Atlanta healthcare facility at competitive rate, with housing included and a standard 90-day contract, she asked the right questions. She requested contract documents. They looked real. She accepted. She flew into Hartsfield-Jackson on October 19, 2025. A man in a gray Kia Sportage picked her up at arrivals. He told her the housing was a short-term rental near the facility, while permanent arrangements were finalized. The drive south on I-75 took about 25 minutes. Mara's mother in Louisville reported her missing on October 24th. 5 days after her flight landed, a young medical assistant from Chattanooga, Tennessee, referred to as Kara and 23 years old, answered a different listing from the same LLC. The posting described a corporate au pair position in Atlanta, providing household and administrative support for a senior executive family, with flexible scheduling and a generous accommodation package. Kara had experience working with children. The pay was higher than anything she'd seen on legitimate platforms. She drove down from Chattanooga on a Saturday in late October and met her recruiter at a gas station off I-75. She was never captured on camera at that gas station. Hamilton County Sheriff's Office received a missing persons report from her family on November 3rd. The third woman, referred to as Danny and 28 years old, was from Macon. She was a bridesmaid at her college friend's wedding rehearsal dinner on November 8th at a restaurant on Forsyth Street in downtown Macon. Witnesses confirmed she was there until approximately 9:45 p.m. Her car was in the restaurant lot the next afternoon, keys in the console, phone in the cup holder, her small purse still on the front seat. Nothing taken. No signs of struggle. She was the 9th woman recovered from the second-floor bedroom. She had been there 65 days. The task force investigator who first connected the grocery delivery anomaly to the Clayton County address was a civilian analyst at the HSI Atlanta field office. She had been cross-referencing task force flag data against commercial delivery service records obtained through administrative subpoena. The subpoenas covered dozens of properties in the monitoring window. She was looking for pattern deviations, delivery attempts that didn't resolve, driver notes flagging unusual interactions. 3 entries in the delivery service records between late October and mid-November all referenced the same residential address. Each noted that the delivery was refused at the door by a male subject who accepted items through a partial opening but didn't allow the driver to enter or set bags down. One driver's note read, "Guy at door very aggressive. Would not let me pass the step. Paid cash on door. No tip." 3 same-day grocery deliveries, each for unusually large quantities of shelf-stable food. Each refused at the threshold. Each paid in cash. The analyst flagged the address and cross-referenced it against the short-term rental monitoring list already in the task force database. It was there, flagged 6 weeks earlier and placed in lower priority. She moved it to Tier 1 that afternoon and submitted a surveillance request. The gap between when the address was first flagged and when delivery data moved it to active surveillance was 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, 9 women were inside. This gap isn't a failure of the agents involved. It's a structural capacity problem. The task force monitored more than a dozen properties simultaneously, each requiring hours of human analyst work. The real question isn't whether agents acted correctly. They did. It's what we're willing to fund so they don't have to triage. Surveillance began the week of November 17th. 2 agents from the North Georgia Task Force worked rotating shifts in an unmarked vehicle at 2 different street positions. A third camera unit on a utility pole with a narrow-angle lens covered the driveway and garage approach. The camera went in during a 2-hour window on a Tuesday morning, while a utility crew, coordinated in advance, performed routine line maintenance on the same pole. A neighbor 2 houses down watched from her window and later told investigators she'd assumed it was a standard upgrade. She hadn't thought to ask. Over the next 11 days, they documented something methodical. The gray Kia Sportage came and went exclusively between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. During daylight, there was no movement. Curtains stayed drawn on every window. The garage door opened twice during surveillance, both times between midnight and 2 a.m., closing within minutes with no one visibly entering or exiting on foot. No mail accepted. No packages on the porch. One neighbor who'd tried to introduce herself in late October was met by a male subject at the door who spoke briefly, gave no name, and closed it. The power draw on the utility account was running at approximately 140% of baseline for a residential property that size. The utility account was registered to a name the task force couldn't immediately associate with any known subject, a third-party name used to establish service before the rental period began. On November 28th, a courier vehicle not previously seen at the property, a white Dodge Ram cargo van registered to a business address in College Park, Georgia, made 2 stops at the house. The first lasted 9 minutes. The second, that evening, lasted 4 minutes. Both times, a male driver carried items inside and left without them. Agents photographed the plates both times. The College Park address linked to that registration would become the second operational target in the breach, what the task force called the courier apartment, a second-floor unit in a mixed-use building off Old National Highway. By early December, the task force had enough to request an expansion of the surveillance warrant and initiate a formal federal investigation. The case was assigned to a senior special agent at the Atlanta field office, referred to as Agent Reeves, who took lead on what would become the 77-day clock. That clock, as agents understood it, wasn't a countdown to a planned operation. It was a backward calculation. When the 9 women were eventually recovered and investigators reconstructed the intake timeline, the earliest confirmed entry date was October 22nd, 3 days after Mara flew into Hartsfield-Jackson. 77 days. That's how long the house had been running before the breach team reached the garage door at 4:48 a.m. on January 7th, 2026. What's most surprising isn't how sophisticated the operation was. It's how ordinary it looked. A beige house on a residential street. A staffing LLC with a job board. A recruiter who knew which platforms young professional women checked. Nothing about the exterior resembled the organized criminal infrastructure the task force was designed to find. From every angle, it looked like nothing. That was the strategy. The LLC had been constructed to appear legitimate. Subject 1 used a real Gwinnett County address, a real phone number routed through a VoIP service, and real template documents from legal staffing industry sources. The contracts sent to recruits like Mara contained accurate legal language, plausible compensation figures, and references to a healthcare facility that, when checked against Georgia licensing databases, actually existed. The facility had no knowledge of the LLC and no contract with it. But to someone reviewing the document without cross-checking directly, the reference looked credible. In the weeks following the breach, federal agents executed a forensic review of the LLC's digital footprint. They found a sophisticated layering system. The VoIP number had been routed through 2 relay services before terminating on a burner handset that was never recovered. The professional networking profile used to contact Mara and at least 3 other women used a composite identity, a real name, fabricated credentials, a profile photograph almost certainly generated through an AI image tool, and an employment history referencing companies that existed but had no record of the listed individual. The profile was active for approximately 40 days before being taken down, 3 days after Mara flew into Atlanta. It had connected with over 200 women in healthcare and childcare professions across 6 southeastern states during that window. 200 outreach contacts. 9 confirmed victims in the Clayton County house. The task force's working assumption was that additional victims existed at locations not yet identified. That assumption was later confirmed. The forensic evidence from the house added further dimensions. Agents processed the property over 4 days following the breach and documented the second-floor bedroom, 2 mattresses on the floor, each with a single folded blanket. A shared bathroom adjacent with no interior lock. A single window covered first with blackout material and then with a sheet of plywood screwed from outside. Food containers, primarily canned goods and sealed dry packages, stacked along the interior wall. A water cooler unit positioned near the door with 2 5-gallon jugs. On the interior wall beside the bedroom door, beneath layers of paint dated by forensic chemists to the occupancy period, agents found markings scratched into drywall at approximately knee height. Investigators cataloged them without public release of the specific content. They were documented in the evidence log and formed part of the government's charging package. The task force identified 5 individuals as core members. Subject 1 ran the recruiting LLC front. Subject 2 and 3, a male and female operating together, managed the property and daily logistics. Subject 4 was the courier, the driver of the white Dodge Ram. Subject 5 was the operational coordinator who moved between the house, College Park, and multiple other sites in Metro Atlanta that agents hadn't yet fully mapped. Subject 5 was the one who kept slipping. Over the 6 weeks of surveillance, agents documented Subject 5's presence at the Clayton County property on only 3 confirmed occasions. He didn't use the Kia or the Ram. He used a rotating set of rental vehicles, always different makes, always booked under names that traced back to synthetic identity documents. He was careful. He arrived at odd intervals. He never stayed more than 30 minutes. Agent Reeves later noted in case memos that Subject 5's pattern suggested prior law enforcement training, not an amateur being cautious, but someone trained to assume surveillance and adapt accordingly. When the indictment was filed, Subject 5 was identified as the architect of the LLC pipeline and organizer of a broader network that the task force believed extended beyond Clayton County. As of this writing, he hasn't been apprehended and remains the subject of an active federal fugitive warrant, with the U.S. Marshals Southeast Regional Fugitive Task Force leading the hunt. More on that in a moment. The evidence package that supported the indictment was assembled over 41 days between late November and early January. It included surveillance footage, license plate records from the property, financial records tied to the LLC and its associated debit card network, delivery service records, flagged by the civilian analyst, VoIP call logs from the recruiter's contact number, and records of missing persons reports filed in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Georgia that the task force cross-referenced against the property's intake timeline. The missing persons cross-reference was the element that transformed the case from a financial irregularity investigation into a federal captivity case. When Agent Reeves's team mapped the missing persons reports against the earliest confirmed presence dates at the Clayton County property, 9 names aligned. 9 women, All reported missing between mid-October and mid-November. All last seen traveling to or through Metro Atlanta, all within the geographic range of the LLC's recruitment activity. Mara, Kara, Danny, and 6 others. Before breach authorization, Agent Reeves's team requested one additional investigative step that would factor directly into the indictment. They submitted a warrant for subscriber records and call logs from the VoIP relay service used by Subject 1's recruiter line. The warrant returned records covering 43 days. During that window, the recruiter line had placed or received over 300 contacts, calls, texts, and platform messages routed through the relay. Most were outreach to potential recruits that went unanswered or were declined. But embedded in those records were 17 communications, with a number linked to Subject 5's synthetic identity network, and 6 with numbers associated with Subject 2 and 3 at the Clayton County property. Those 6 communications between Subject 1 and the property managers formed the evidentiary spine, connecting the recruiting front directly to the place of captivity. Without them, the government's conspiracy charge would have rested on circumstantial association. With them, it was documented coordination. The task force also obtained records from the third-party rental platform through which the Clayton County house had been booked. Those records showed a continuous booking under a single corporate account established in August 2025, approximately 6 weeks before the LLC was registered. The corporate account used a business name that didn't match the LLC, a second shell entity existing only as a name attached to a debit card. The debit card traced to a prepaid account opened at a check-cashing outlet in Fulton County. The outlet's surveillance footage from the opening date had already been overwritten when agents requested it. Another closed door. The decision to breach was made in the first week of January. Agent Reeves and the task force supervisory agent presented the case to HSI Atlanta's special agent in charge on January 3rd. The presentation included a risk assessment. The property had been continuously occupied for more than 70 days. The power draw data, the supply run frequency, and the absence of any departure movement consistent with voluntary occupancy suggested that the individuals inside hadn't left since arrival. The longer the operation continued without intervention, the greater the risk that the network would detect surveillance and relocate. The SAC authorized the breach. In the 72 hours between authorization and execution, the task force ran final confirmation checks on all 5 subjects. Subject 1 was geo-locked through VoIP activity to a DeKalb County residential address. Subject 2 and 3 were confirmed present at Clayton County through overnight surveillance. Subject 4's vehicle was documented at the College Park apartment on January 6th evening. Subject 5's last confirmed sighting was 4 days earlier, a rental vehicle registered to one of his synthetic identities, caught on a toll plaza camera on I-85 southbound, traveling away from Atlanta. That sighting, in retrospect, wasn't random. It was departure staging. Here's what doesn't sit right, even now. Subject 5 knew the indictment was coming. Not the exact date or time, but the task force's internal assessment, filed after the breach, concluded that Subject 5 had been in contact with sources inside the courier network who registered anomalies in their routes in the days before January 7th. He didn't warn the others in time. He moved himself. The 4 ring members present at the property and College Park on January 7th were either unaware of the danger or unable to act on it. Subject 5 was neither. He was at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Terminal F, at approximately 3:15 a.m. on January 7th. U.S. Marshals had been placed on standby at the airport beginning at 2 a.m., 90 minutes before Subject 5 arrived. The terminal coverage that morning had a gap, a staffing rotation at one of the international connector corridors that normally would have been filled. It wasn't filled that morning. Subject 5 moved through that corridor at 3:17 a.m. The breach team hit the Clayton County house at 4:47. Marshals reached Terminal F at 4:49. Subject 5 was 90 minutes ahead of the arrest warrant by the time agents had confirmed the gap. He wasn't on any departing flight tracked out of Hartsfield-Jackson that morning. He didn't use his identity documents at any airport checkpoint after 3:17 a.m. The working assumption as of early July 2026 is that he exited via ground transportation and is moving through the southeast under a new identity. Put yourself in Agent Reeves's position at 4:50 a.m. on January 7th. Breach team inside, 9 women being brought out, and simultaneously receiving confirmation that the man who built this operation had walked through the airport 90 minutes earlier. 2 things happening at the same time. The thing you came for, and the thing that got away. The breach proceeded in 2 simultaneous operations, coordinated down to the minute. The Clayton County entry team and a separate 4-agent element assigned to the College Park apartment moved at 4:47 a.m. to prevent either location from alerting the other. At the Clayton County house, the garage entry team breached the side door cleanly. No resistance. The first floor contained Subject 2 and Subject 3 in the main living area. They were taken into custody without incident. Subject 2 was on a couch. Subject 3 was in the kitchen. Neither offered physical resistance. The second entry stack moved up the interior staircase after the first floor was secured. At the top, they found a single hallway. 3 doors. The first 2 were unlocked and empty. The third, the door to the master bedroom at the rear, was secured with an exterior padlock, a contractor-grade lock. The kind you can cut in under 30 seconds with bolt cutters. 32 seconds after reaching the third door, it was open. 9 women were inside. In a room approximately 250 square feet. They weren't restrained at entry. All 9 were conscious and ambulatory. The lead agent's after-action report described the scene in one sentence. The condition of the occupants was consistent with prolonged confinement and warranted immediate medical evaluation. All 9 were taken by ambulance to a receiving hospital in Clayton County. All 9 received clinical evaluation. The nature of that evaluation isn't part of this record. What is? All 9 were alive. All 9 could walk. At the College Park apartment, Subject 4 was taken into custody at 4:48 a.m. He was the only occupant. Subject 1 was apprehended separately at a DeKalb County residential address at 5:12 a.m. by a 3rd Task Force element holding position since 4 a.m. 4 in custody, 1 not. In the hours and days following the breach, federal agents conducted preliminary interviews with the 4 individuals taken into custody. The interviews were at 2 different detention facilities under standard federal custodial protocols with counsel present or offered at each stage. None of the 4 made substantive statements in their initial interviews. All 4 invoked their right to counsel within the first hour. The interview that generated the most evidentiary movement wasn't conducted with any of the arrested subjects. It was conducted with a 5th individual, a peripheral associate of Subject 4 who hadn't been identified as a subject before the breach and wasn't arrested on January 7th. This individual, referred to as Witness A in supplemental task force documents, had made a single delivery to the Clayton County property in mid-December, accompanying Subject 4 on the white Dodge Ram route. According to the post-breach account, Witness A didn't know the nature of what was inside. Witness A waited in the van while Subject 4 carried items in. Agents identified Witness A through Subject 4's phone records recovered from the College Park apartment. The phone wasn't encrypted. It contained contact logs, message threads, and location data, covering a 30-day window ending on January 7th. Witness A's contact appeared 3 times in that window, including once on the December delivery date. Agents interviewed Witness A on January 11th at the HSI Atlanta field office. The interview lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. Witness A provided information about Subject 4's routine, the College Park apartments' function as a staging and storage location, and critically, a physical description and partial name fragment associated with Subject 5 that the task force hadn't previously possessed. That information was immediately forwarded to the U.S. Marshals Southeast Regional Fugitive Task Force and became the primary new lead in the Subject 5 manhunt as of mid-January. The families received calls before dawn. Mara's mother in Louisville picked up at 5:31 a.m. She hadn't slept, hadn't been sleeping regularly since October 24th. A victim services coordinator from HSI Atlanta made the call. It lasted less than 3 minutes. The coordinator said, "Your daughter has been located and is receiving medical care. She is alive." Kara's family in Chattanooga received their call at 5:38. Danny's sister in Macon at 5:44. 6 other families in Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama received calls within the hour. Not one of them had known until that morning that the cases were connected. They'd been filing reports with different sheriff's offices, different police departments. They'd been told in several instances that adult missing persons cases with no evidence of foul play at the point of disappearance were difficult to resource. One family had retained a private investigator who'd hit a dead end in mid-December. They'd been waiting separately, not knowing they were waiting together. The federal indictment, unsealed on January 8th, charged 4 individuals with federal trafficking-related offenses under Title 18 of the United States Code, conspiracy charges, and unlawful detention. The government's charging documents described the LLC as a fraudulent recruitment front used to lure adult women into false employment arrangements and transport them to a controlled location. The documents referenced the 9 recovered victims without identifying them by name. Subject 5, identified in the indictment as a co-conspirator and charged in absentia, remains at large as of July 10, 2026. The U.S. Marshals Southeast Regional Fugitive Task Force has issued a federal fugitive warrant. The task force's active investigation now extends to 3 additional Metro Atlanta properties identified during the post-breach evidence review. 2 of those properties had been vacated before agents could reach them. 1 was empty. The network was larger than the Clayton County indictment reflects. The scope of what Subject 5 built remains an open question in the federal record. The full geographic range. The number of operations that may have preceded the Clayton County house. The identities and current whereabouts of additional personnel. Here's the take that will probably draw some pushback. The system that allowed this operation to run for 77 days before intervention isn't a failure of the agents who ultimately cracked it. It's a failure of resource allocation. The task force that broke this case was running more than a dozen simultaneous property flags on a surveillance budget that required triage. That triage cost weeks. The civilian analyst who pulled the grocery delivery records and moved this address to Tier 1 did so as a secondary function, cross-referencing data obtained through subpoenas filed for a different case. She found the thread by accident. That isn't a design. That's luck. What the case leaves behind isn't resolution. 4 defendants face federal charges. The sentencing timeline extends into 2027. All 4 have entered not guilty pleas. No trial date has been set. The women recovered from that second floor are in various stages of what the clinical record calls recovery. That word does a lot of work. It covers a range of experience this record won't attempt to describe. One detail that stuck with me in reviewing this case: The grocery delivery driver who kept getting turned away never filed a formal complaint. He left feedback in the app's internal system. He mentioned it to a coworker. He didn't call police. He had no reason to think it was anything but an antisocial homeowner. He had no way of knowing. And yet that note, very aggressive, would not let me pass the step, typed into a delivery app feedback field sometime in mid-November, is what moved a house from Tier 2 to Tier 1 in a federal task force database. A single field note, typed in less than 30 seconds. The network that ran through the beige house on the Clayton County cul-de-sac is dismantled in part. The man who designed it is somewhere in the southeast, moving under a name that doesn't appear in any database the task force currently holds. The LLC's job listing page was taken down the morning of January 8th within hours of the indictment becoming public record. A new listing on a different platform, using different language but the same structural template, housing included during placement, immediate start, was flagged by an HSI analyst in a different city in late February. Subject 5 hasn't been located. The investigation continues. Drop a comment if you've followed the federal fugitive manhunt out of Atlanta. We read